Hello, everyone, and welcome to the January 27th episode of the LGS Pod. I'm John Cross, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. To continue my theme of giving random life updates that have nothing to do with soccer, I was informed this week that you can set your iPhone to automatically screen calls that are not from numbers that are not in your phone book. So like it won't reject them, but it will ask them like, who
Interesting.
are you and why are you calling? And it will give me that as a text, like a text update. And then I can, either let it go to voicemail or answer the call or reject it from there. And oh boy, I've had it turned on for 2 days and I've screened so many calls and it's been wonderful. I highly recommend.
I might have to look into that.
If you have an iPhone, it's in settings, you go to apps, phone, and then there's a section called like screen calls or something like that. Highly recommend.
All right. I will keep that in mind and probably look that up and maybe have an update for you next week if I start using it and see how much it's changed for me. Although, I have to say, anymore, I don't get too many calls. My calls come from pretty much immediate family, and that's about it for me that I get.
Well, you know what's interesting? I don't usually pick up random phone numbers I don't recognize, but sometimes if I'm like expecting a call from a San Diego area and it's like a 619 or an 858 area code, I will pick it up. And I would say like 9 times out of 10 that it's a junk call. They're looking for my dad. So I do, I wonder if your kids get some junk calls looking for you.
I wonder. Yeah. I'll have to ask them. Yeah, I don't have any, I guess, big life updates for that, but I spent the last weekend doing a lot of work for the San Diego Soccer History Society, a lot of planning stuff. So hopefully we'll be able to start making some announcements about things here over the next couple of months as we start to get that rolling out. But it was a good planning weekend for me. I really had dedicated the entire weekend to doing just that. Of course, hard sometimes to focus on I'll call it fun stuff that we're doing. I find it fun with all the other, crap that's going on in the world that tends to not only distract me from my work, but at times I feel guilty doing the fun stuff with all the shit that's going on.
Yeah.
It's really have mixed feelings sometimes prepping and getting ready for a soccer podcast when, there's craziness going on in the world.
I think
it seems wrong sometimes.
I totally get that. And I'm sure you know this, but I think it's important to remember that sometimes just projecting like joy and like an actual zest for life in the face of oppression like this, and I'm a white dude who came up in a middle class family. I don't know oppression, but I'm just saying history tells us that high spirits in the face of oppression is one of the best ways for people who would rather see peace prevail to fight against things like that. So continue with your soccer pod, continue with your soccer history, continue with whatever brings you joy, because it's things like that you need in times like this.
Well, I will pass along something that did bring me some joy today. Mixed feelings, I guess, because as I've mentioned on the pod before, I loosely follow Bradford City because that was my father's club over in England. They played Lincoln today, which we've talked about a bit on the podcast because of some other San Diego connections with Lincoln City. And they're both doing well in League One over in England. And the disappointing part was the 3-0 loss that Bradford City had to Lincoln. They were thoroughly outplayed. But at the beginning of the match, Lincoln did a very nice remembrance for the 56 people who perished in the Bradford fire back on May 11th in 1985, which I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar at all with that story. I think that's one of those ones that gets a little bit lost among all the other horrible stadium disasters that,
well, especially in the 80s, right? You've got
yeah, it happened 2 weeks before Heysel.
Okay, yeah, so there you go.
And it's but anyway, without getting into that, because you could do a whole podcast just on, you know, how all that came about and what was going on. But the opponent in that match, where, you know, the main stand burned down, like it went from a little fire to engulfing the entire stand in 4 minutes on live television. It's
Yikes.
pretty spectacular in that sense, kind of thing, but devastating because of old stadium designs and other things we've seen in similar stadium problems where there have been, you know, congestion of people, limited exits, those kinds of things. But the opponent in that match was Lincoln when they played there.
Oh,
So it was really nice to see that tribute that Lincoln did. They had an entire section in the claret and amber, the colors of Bradford City, and a sign just, you know, remembering the 56 people who perished in that. And I thought that was quite touching and quite nice. And again, you know, when you said look for some of the good, and these are the things to me when we see supporters doing this kind of stuff rather than, you know, the hateful, angry stuff that comes out in sports a lot between different supporter groups. It's you know, those are the kinds of things that really, I think, stand out a lot more, and certainly stand out in a positive way. And I hope moving forward in lots of ways we can see more of that. The kindness extended out towards other groups and just celebrating the joy and the love of the game, and not, you know, the craziness that we see around us, um, you know, going on in life, especially in this country right now.
yeah, I agree. I didn't realize that Lincoln was the opponent in that game in the 80s. So that is a nice little tribute that they've done there. And I think that's one of the things that having a club be kind of community or like locale focused kind of allows you to do is it's a vessel to remember and honor that community in ways that go outside of the pitch, right? And I'm not saying
Right.
American teams don't do that, but it's a little bit different, right? Um, but yeah, that's very cool. Much respect to both Bradford and Lincoln for putting that on. And you know, to the point of the you said that, you know, old stadium design, and a lot of people, there's been a lot of discussion around safe standing and like the all seater stadiums in the Premier League and the top four divisions of English football over the last 10 years. Um, and a lot of that discussion is often focused towards Hillsborough, and you know, not unfairly so. That is a really good example of why safe standing is so important. But I think things like the Bradford fire as well, like it's not just about, oh, there were, you know, too many people, it was bad management and it caused, you know, an overflow, to put it very lightly. You know, I'm not trying to get into the details there, but it's also sometimes like if it's poorly designed, people can't get out. And so it's
Yeah.
there's I think a lot of people don't give that aspect of why safe standing is so important enough credit, and it's kind of impressive that modern stadiums have been designed in such a way that these sorts of things don't happen as often. So you know,
Right.
it's
We have
it's
we,
so anyway. I was kind of tailing off there. Go ahead.
yeah, I was gonna say we've learned certainly
Mhm.
from past history mistakes, especially in terms of design and upkeep of the stadium. That was part of the problem in Bradford as well.
Yes, yes.
Um, but yeah, it's, you know, like sometimes I think back at how stadiums were designed, especially in England,
Right. There
and
was
you
an
know,
ethos
it
of
was
just
a
packing as many people in as you could.
yeah, and really around the world. But you
Yeah.
know, there's a lot of stuff we see. You know, we've had incidents throughout the UK. Um, you know, like you said, Hillsborough, Ibrox, both the one in 1902 and the one in 1971, I believe it was. But right, we just have, you know, stuff that you don't see anymore, like you said, because of better stadium
Yeah.
design,
You know,
which is good.
I realize the reason that this has been on my mind because that I feel I feel like that did seem like a bit of a random tangent to go off into effusive praise of, you know, infrastructure design, but I think logistics have been on my mind a lot recently because of the way that Minneapolis has really impressed me with how, not that I expected any less of the people of Minneapolis. I've never been to Minneapolis. I don't know. But the way that community has not only come together, but like set up the logistics to support their coming together is really, really impressive. And so I guess where I was going with that tangent was like a shout out to the people who do the unseen work of the logistics on a match day, because it's not a coincidence that we've gone this long without another Hillsborough or Bradford Fire. So yeah, it's, we take these things for granted, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think we do. But it's, some of these things serve as a reminder as to why we have some of these changes. Sometimes when people complain, like, why can't we do certain things? Well, this is why.
A lot of rules
we don't do it.
Written in blood, whether or not the people of today realize it.
Right. All right. Well, let's move on from maybe some not so cheery conversation. And we'll probably have some not so cheery conversation going on for this episode as well. But a little preview of how tonight's episode is going to be laid out, because we're kind of in a transition, doing a little bit of a format change for the LGS pod as we start winding down the LGS pod, because maybe as early as March, we might be officially winding down this podcast and transitioning to our new one. We're not really just changing the name. It's really like transitioning to a brand new
It'll be a total
podcast.
Change of format. Yeah.
Yeah. But we're going to slightly start, I think, bending this podcast as we're winding it down a little bit into the format of the other one, and start making a little bit of the transition for us as we do that as well. But coming up soon, as this one winds down, we'll be starting a new weekly podcast, the two of us, this week in San Diego soccer history, and still working on the full details of what that format is going to be. But obviously by the name, we're going to be focusing on San Diego soccer history. A lot of it will try to tie into the particular week we are in. So today is January 27th, 2026. We try to look at things that are around this day and date and this particular week, but look back in history for what was going on at the time. So we're going to do that a little bit this episode. So we're not going to do this day in San Diego history, even though one of the things we're going to talk about does actually happen on January 27th. But we have three particular things we'll dip back into San Diego soccer history. One will be the San Diego Soccer's 48-game winning streak, not undefeated streak, but winning streak that they had. 48 games still, to the best of my knowledge, is the record for United States professional soccer in terms of a winning streak of matches. So we'll look at that because it officially came to an end on this day in 2013. Plus, this being, as we've mentioned on previous podcasts, being the 50th anniversary of the San Diego Jaws season, which was only one season in San Diego, but they were the precursor to the Sockers, and the 25th anniversary of the San Diego Spirit when they started, our first professional women's team, first division women's team. We will kind of dig into a little bit of the background of those two stories and kind of what was going on in those years in 1976 and 2001 for each of those respective teams. So we'll start diving into that a little bit and look at trying to, as we transition to our new podcast, reliving those seasons a little bit, kind of really digging in and going deep into what was happening at those particular with those teams and what was happening in those years. And, it'll be a little springboard to get into some other soccer and what was going on with soccer besides just in San Diego at those particular times. So let me double check and make sure I'm not missing anything. But that should be it. And then we'll try to end the show with some suggestions of some local matches to get out and go see. But for now, like we've always done, we'll start off with looking at some current event news before we get into those. So, Dylan, first up, World Cup boycott, at least in terms of chatter, seems to be picking up steam, especially after last weekend. With the events here in the U.S., we have another fan group that said they're not going, but another LGBTQ plus related fan group, um, they're also not coming. We've got more people talking about safety, especially in terms of the US. So I'm going to ask you, do you think the boycott, and again, that could be interpreted in lots of different ways, is picking up steam? Is it just being used as leverage for things people want to discuss right now? What's the likelihood do you see besides individuals, right? We've always talked individuals are going to boycott it, but will there be a uniform, bigger kind of boycott that actually has some kind of impact on the games?
Okay, so I think there are kind of two ways you can talk about a boycott, quote unquote. So I want to start by saying kind of what you ended with there, the individual. I think that whether or not there's a formal boycott organized, stated, made official by some large body involved or not, there will be a soft boycott amongst pretty much the entire world. Because the individual, whether they're thinking of it as a boycott or not, when you are just making the basic calculation of cost and safety versus experience, like it's a pretty obvious answer to not go unless you are an extremely wealthy individual. And that, more than previous tournaments in the United States matters because that can help ensure your safety in a way it probably couldn't, in times past. So there will be a soft boycott, especially amongst those that are not ultra wealthy. So there's that. Formal boycotts, I don't know. I'm kind of torn because if you'd asked me like a week and a half ago, I'd have said absolutely. I think a lot of the large European nations will boycott. But that was kind of because I thought this whole Greenland thing was going to turn into more than it seemed to turn into, wherein the United States got exactly what it had already, but gets to pretend that we got a victory somehow. Genuinely, if we're threatening European sovereignty, they shouldn't come and play tournaments here. I think that's a super reasonable thing. So now that that has somewhat fizzled, I'm a little more skeptical that we'll get like a formal state level boycott. However, just today, I did see that the German government officially issued a travel restriction or notice or like don't travel
Like a
recommendation.
warning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the United States, which is, I don't know, maybe drastic's a bit of a strong word, but it's not an insignificant thing. Um, and Germany, I mean, has Germany's government has been one of the most deferential in the European Union as far as the power players go towards Trump thus far. So it's significant that they're saying that, and you do wonder if other European nations will follow suit. And I did see as well that, and I mean, we could. This is a whole other tangent, but a very, shall I say, notorious publication in France, Charlie Hebdo. I saw a leak of their cover that's coming out tomorrow, and it's pretty brutal in their
Mm.
classic Charlie Hebdo way against ICE. And so, and I saw too that like ICE is going to be in Italy for the Olympics next summer, and
Yeah, I
or
saw
this summer
something
rather,
about
and
that.
or
For the
this
Winter
winter
Olympics,
rather
just in a
next
couple weeks.
month. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like that's fucking ridiculous. But not to go too deep in that. But the point I'm trying to get at is even if there isn't like a state official boycott, like there is a large cultural movement against anything United States, the way we saw in Canada 6 months, 12 months ago. So I don't know. Are teams going to pull out of the tournament? I don't think so, unless there is like a real threat to European sovereignty, like again, all of Greenland. I don't think we're going to see national teams pulling out, but between the cost and the threats to safety and the general cultural shift away from American hegemony, I really think we're at risk of like seeing not full stadiums at this point.
Yeah, I don't think in a big picture sense that there will be boycotts of the World Cup itself. And
Right.
part of that, I think, and this this is something I think FIFA needs to think about for future World Cups, is that this is not a World Cup hosted by the US. This is a World Cup hosted by 3 different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to pull out, you're punishing Canada and Mexico for part of that. And I'm sure some people use that as an argument as to why they should stay. But even if you don't boycott the World Cup, teams, countries, fans could absolutely divert their time and interest and what they want to do to go to Canada and go to Mexico and do all the things there because there aren't problems there, and just not spend their money or come to the United States. And I could absolutely seeing that we might see in the summer huge full festive stadia, great atmosphere in the host cities in Mexico and the host cities in Canada, and we see
Not that.
protests and not full stadium and everything else in
Yeah.
the United
No,
States
I agree.
during the same tournament.
Well, and people, that's, kind of on the flip side of that, people have pointed out that FIFA doesn't technically need to relocate the World Cup to not have games in the US. You could just lean a lot harder on Mexico and Canada. And I recognize that logistically it's too late to do that. But
yeah, logistically it's too
right.
late. There's no way that's happening.
But to your point, there will be a distinct dichotomy, I think, between games hosted in those 2 countries and games hosted here.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure we will hear more about this as we get closer, and whatever world events happen, there will be threats. But I'm sure from a fan perspective, it will be very interesting once we come to the 2026 Men's World Cup. But let's shift to U.S. soccer. U.S. soccer has their AGM coming up, I believe, next month. I don't remember the exact dates off the top of my head, but I just saw something today or yesterday that Cindy Parlow-Cone, who's the current president, is running unopposed. And I'm not sure what I think about that. I don't know if that's good or bad. I depending when you catch me, I may be leaning one way or the other. Does that indicate maybe even within US soccer, people are happy with this shift and kind of the divorce they're having from MLS having such a heavy influence, and they're positively working in a better direction for all of soccer? Or, is it still cronyism and we're getting more of the same, and we can't even get another candidate or someone to muster any energy because it's difficult to run. It's so difficult to get a nomination anymore because of the rule changes they had not too long back, and you don't get paid for the position, right? So I'm kind of mixed feelings whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know that, Cone has done a terrible job with being president of U.S. soccer. She certainly was more of the MLS pick when we had all the problems, when we had a bunch of people running to replace Carlos Cordero, and what was happening then. But, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that? That there appears to be no opposition to her running for another 4-year term, which will take her, 4-year or 2-year? Oh, I can't remember. I can't remember if it's a 2-year or 4-year term. I think it might be 2 years, but take her through to 2028.
Well, I'll be honest. I don't follow the internal politics of the U.S. Soccer Federation that closely, but I think, like a lot of things, the answer probably lies somewhere in the middle. It's probably a little bit of both. It can both be true that there are a lot of systemic issues in the United States Soccer Federation that lead to inherent cronyism and corruption. And it can also be true that people are generally happy with the direction that the current administration is moving in. I think it's pretty indisputable that in the last 5 years, the United States Soccer Federation has moved away from its clear dedication to MLS. I'm not saying they don't still prefer MLS, but it does seem a little more fair than it did 5 years ago. I mean, I think that, to me, that seems indisputable. And so I don't know. I can kind of see both sides of it.
All right, fair enough on that. So let's switch over to the NWSL. we could talk a lot about the high impact player rule and Trinity Rodman being re-signed and what the impact is, or all of Jessica Berman's corporate speak and how like NWSL is clearly following the MLS kind of blueprint in terms of the business side of things, but I think almost 10 times worse in what they're doing. But I don't want to talk about any of those, actually. I want to talk about the ball. Did you see the new ball for the NWSL that they're going to be using
I have not.
for this? Oh, you have not. Okay. Well, I think people on the kind end have said it looks like a big asterisk on the ball, just kind of like on one side. But what it reminded me of immediately, and a bunch of people posted stuff. I don't know if you're a Community fan, the TV show.
That is one of my all-time favorite shows.
Okay. Well, there was the episode they did, I believe, in season 2. Uh, something about getting a rocket. But anyway, it comes up in the episodes how the group submitted a design for the flag for
Yes,
Greendale.
the E pluribus anus flag. Yes,
The E
I reference
pluribus
that
anus.
often.
Yes, they're crossroads of ideas. and it wins, and then that becomes a running joke within there. And that's what it reminded me of immediately when I saw it.
Well,
And
okay,
then
I'm gonna
I
have
saw
to look at
someone
this now. Hold
I
on.
saw someone take a screen cap of a shot from the episode of Community, and they had the flag, but they replaced the NWSL soccer ball where the other logo was. And it was quite funny. And
All right, hold up. Oh yeah, I totally see where they may have done that. Yep, there it is. There's a picture of the dean holding up the ball.
yeah, if you're not familiar, if you're not familiar with Community, just to our audience, you need to go out and watch that
Yeah,
series.
it's on
hilarious.
Hulu and Peacock.
Yeah.
If you have either of those streaming services, the generally accepted wisdom is that season 4 is a bit not that great, and I guess there's some credence to that. But seasons 1 through 3 are genuinely some of the best television ever made, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And seasons 4 through 6 are still very much worth watching.
Yeah, I would put, for me, Community up there with Arrested Development as two of the
I think they're in
series
that
that
kind of
didn't.
similar vein, right? Like Arrested Development walked so Community could run.
Yeah, it's a classic comedy television there.
It's streets ahead.
Streets ahead, one of my favorite lines.
If you have to ask, your streets behind.
All right.
Anyway, we've gotten way off topic.
Yeah,
We'll never pass up an opportunity to talk Community. I didn't know you were a fan. We'll have to come back to that.
Yeah, rewatched it the
I
whole series
literally
multiple times.
Pretty much always in rotation for me for like background shows when I'm like cooking or cleaning. It always.
Oh yeah, it's great. I'd say every few years, in our family, kind of get something happens, or we make a joke or bring something up, and then all of a sudden we're ended up doing another rewatch and we just plow through it in probably all the seasons in maybe a couple of weeks at most, just to kind of go through everything. But all right, let's switch from NWSL and Community talk and let's get to Major League Soccer. And did you hear their announcement, their partnership with Polymarket?
No, I didn't, but I'm not surprised. I guess my biggest surprise is that it wasn't Kalshi.
Yeah, well, MLS has partnered with Polymarket as one of their, and again, there's plenty of stuff out there that you can go read, but getting into this, well, I guess it's interesting who you talk to, because when you start thinking about the idea of gambling and what athletes, coaches, anybody involved in sport is allowed or not allowed to do through their collective bargaining agreements, to me, this is gambling. But there's a lot of people who are making the argument out there that stuff like Polymarket is not gambling.
Legally, they're correct. That's why these things are allowed to exist.
Exactly. So is it really, are players and stuff really held accountable? if they were to um, try to profit off of things you can do with Polymarket. So that's a whole other issue I'm sure we're going to hear more about. And even people I saw reading today, attorneys suggesting it's like, you may not have players or even coaches, but what about the office staff person who chooses to wait an extra day to send that transfer through, and pick up a few bucks on the side, because they've hedged on something because they're a low paid employee, but they control something that happens.
Well, to that kind of similar extent, I don't know if you saw this. It probably got lost in the shuffle of everything else. When the U.S. extrajudicially kidnaps Nicolas Maduro, some U.S. government agent made
Yes.
like $60,000 on that on Polymarket
On
or Kalshi
basically
or one
oil
of the two.
futures would be the well, yeah,
Yeah.
and oil futures and just whether it'd be taken into custody. And
No,
yeah,
literally
it's
right. Like if he would be deposed sometime in 2026 or in
yeah,
January or something like that. It's rife for corruption at
yeah,
any and in anything, sports, government, just it's gamifying life, and it's I mean, I don't know. It's just so nihilistic in a way that I find really disgusting.
yeah. It makes me, even though we have an MLS team here, an NWSL team, it just, and with FIFA and the World Cup, I keep drifting further and further away from the top tiers of
Hmm.
soccer because of the money, the big money and what's involved in people trying to make money off all the consumers because that's how they view people. And really my attention and energy drifting back to the lower leagues because it's, you know, it might trickle down there at some point, but it's not there yet. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have a little bit more to get back to the purity of the game and the sport for the sporting sake.
You know, it's funny. The other day, my brother and I were talking about how, like, the idea of seeing how the sausage is made is a little like the. It feels like the expression is a bit maybe just for us off base because we both agreed we were much more disgusted by growing up and seeing how sports actually work versus our idealized version as a kid than learning how
Mm.
sausage is actually made. Because whatever, I still love sausage, but once I've learned how sports actually work, especially with what
Yeah,
happened with Loyal and the A's in the same year, it's been hard to look at sports the same way. But I still love sausage, so make of that what you
that's a
will.
that's a fair point right there. I like that. I might have to remember that one.
Yes, please
All
feel
right.
free.
Well, drifting down into somewhat of the lower leagues, just getting below our top tiers, or not necessarily. I think the biggest news to come out of today, January 27th, is the announcement from USL that there's actually a name for the first division, which comes as no surprise to anybody that it's going to be USL Premier. With the naming conventions they've already used, they had set that up,
Yeah, they sure did.
almost 10 years ago now when they started making the shift of their changes of their names from Championship and League One and League Two. So we now have identified USL Premier. We know how many teams. Ideally, they want it to be a national footprint, 20 team league. We know the Championship. They also want a national footprint, 20 teams there. And we have a League One or a third division that's going to be regionalized, but without any details for that. 2028 is supposed to be the launch of USL Premier. So this is all on the men's side we're talking about. Still unclear, at least not today. They talked about promotion relegation. They talked about maybe two teams going up and two teams going down until they get closer to 20, then three up, three down. So similar to what other large leagues do around the world. But no definite about when Pro Rel might actually start. And then no comment about USL 2. And of course, right, we can talk about the USLPA here in a second, but let's just stick without talking about the players. Let's just talk about the structure for a second, then we can get into all the stuff that the USLPA also put out today on the heels of this. But just from a structural standpoint, what are your thoughts with what the USL League office put out today about a roadmap forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very exciting. I think there are a lot of fair questions that especially those of us who are kind of plugged in will have about the CBA and how that will look. But I have actually heard some rumblings that to me sound very positive, and I suspect maybe the um, the the players union or whatever you were referring to might actually kind of be moving in that direction. So I'll leave that for later. But I like the way they're moving. I wish they were a little. I don't know. Maybe this is just me. I kind of wish the USL Championship, like so, the Division Two. I think maybe eventually they might want to regionalize that, but maybe I don't know. That's me thinking ahead. I like that USL League One. The plan is to regionalize there. I think the eventual goal of 20 teams is really good. The thing that's really stood out to me is Paul McDonough. I think it was said that they're aiming to have 14 teams in the first season, of which 8 or 9 will be current USL championship teams or current
Right.
USL teams, which I think is very interesting for 2 reasons. One, because I think it does make a lot more sense to go with your already existing teams in bigger markets. But two, I, it doesn't sound to me like he's saying they're planning to add a bunch of expansion teams. It sounds to me like they're going to go after already existing independent clubs, which, is maybe me getting ahead of myself, but I think Chattanooga FC, things like that. It's very exciting. Oh my goodness, excuse me. But so that was the thing that really jumped out to me. This notion that they're gonna look to bring in other clubs. I don't know. That really perked my ears up.
Yeah, I saw that as well. 8-ish clubs already identified from the championship, which obviously over the next couple years could change. Um, Not sure how many clubs currently in the championship have applied or really want to be there or feel they're ready to be there. Maybe they want to be there, they just don't feel they're ready yet, or won't be ready by 2028. Um, and as you said, certainly leaves the door open for a quote unquote expansion team, someone who's not actually in the system right now. So those are all interesting. I'm not. I mean, I presented my thought of regionalization many episodes back. So the first thing I'm happy for is there's a plan, right? They have announced publicly a plan of where they want to go. Now, everybody can be on the same page. We're not wondering when it's going to start. How big is it going to be? It gives some structure. And I think, and maybe you'll allude to this a little bit and when we get to talking about the CBA, I think this also being out there publicly also helps. I think ultimately it helps with the negotiations that are happening with the players union. Um, I don't know right now, like not saying that something is going to happen right away, but I think having that structure in place and it being announced publicly, it's not management behind closed doors saying, oh, we're going to do this, but they haven't really, they're not being held accountable to that because they haven't made that public announcement. So I think by making this public announcement, I think it helps those conversations and it will help them be more focused. My only concern right now is if you're going to have, I'm very concerned about League One and the bridge between League One and the championship. And if they really regionalize League One, like I think it should be, but you keep the championship only a 20-team league and don't also regionalize it in some way, like you suggested. If you make it so difficult a leap to get from League One to the championship because you have so many regions and so many teams all vying for a couple of berths, then it's not like you can really advance very well. Like there really isn't that I really can make it up to the next level. Plus, if you're in the championship and you drop down, what is your chance of getting back into the championship again? Like it could be devastating if there's not that that actually like there's a legitimate chance. If you're in England, and we're just talking the football league here, not getting down to the National League, but if you drop, there's three spots that you have to work with, and two of them are automatic, and the other one I actually can be within the top six and still enter a playoff. So there's really a legitimate chance that I could try to get back up. Not a super difficult one. So don't know what they're going to do because really we have a bit of a run up. So that's just one slight concern. And I also that they haven't mentioned anything about League Two and what their plans are and how that may act as a pre-professional league to help build that transition, to help promote people up out of League Two, to help fill in League Three. And again, maybe those things are coming down the road. I still have some concerns about there because we don't know. There's no plan. But I do think if there's anything that I learned from doing the episodes we've done over the last year in terms of looking at how pyramids developed over time, they really have to focus on getting their top division set properly. Like even if they start with 14 teams, like that's it. No one now comes in there unless they're getting promoted up. And then what you do is you start working on the championship and really make sure that's strong and you get the nice promotion relegation going back. But if they just, I don't know, I mean, I'm kind of mixed, but we've seen that's the way pyramids that have developed have been the most successful. But the other thing that's nice in a way, USL will have 3 entry points at least over the next 2 years. I mean, Premier won't start till 28, but theoretically, you've got several entry points. You could get in at USL 2 if you're not quite ready. You could get in at League 1 over the next couple of years. You could get in at Championship, right? Because some of those teams are going to be moving up. They're going to need to fill the Championship as well. So, in that sense, it's good they have that structure in place, but I really think they need to solidify that top end of what it is so that people know what they're working toward, and not once they start after that first year take in any expansion teams in USL Premier.
Yeah, I agree. I think it makes the most sense to have teams come in towards the bottom of the pyramid. I don't know if USL 2 will ever really kind of be a fully plugged in part of that pyramid. I think what we might see in the long run is more teams will start there, and if they really want to make the jump into professionalism, they'll pay the fee or whatever it is to get into League One, kind of how we talked about before. The thing I wanted to say, and as far as I know, I've not been asked to not share this, so I will go ahead and say it. I don't think it's official in any capacity, but I was told that at the Independent Soccer Council or Independent Supporters Union, I think it was.
Right. Yeah, they just had their conference last weekend.
The players' associations from MLS, USL, NWSL, and WNT. I don't know if the MNT was involved, but they weren't listed in what I was told. Announced plans to, in the future, in an official capacity, create an umbrella players association. All of the PFA in England, which I think personally is a great idea because it increases their collective bargaining power.
Right.
2, if you want to have a true unified pyramid, you need a collective, or rather an umbrella CBA like that, because players need to know that their livelihood isn't going to be pulled out from under them if they get relegated. So yeah. Again, I don't know. I was told that you can expect like statements from SGs and stuff coming soon about this, so it might be in the works already. It wasn't totally clear from the info I got, but sounds like it's in the works, and I personally think that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, I agree. That's a nice segue to get us into at least currently the USLPA. They certainly put out some social media posts today that were I don't know critical about what USL is doing. I think some people took it that way, but I think still making the argument, great. If you're going to go this direction and you're going to call this professional and this is going to be premier and it's going to be top division, then you need to treat your players like professionals where they can earn a living doing this, and not, some of the contract situations we've heard about, especially with these negotiations and people making really below the poverty level, in terms of what they're doing. And they have to work like lots of people, but work multiple jobs to be able to afford to live or have roommates or whatever it is, because they're not really making a true living wage. So what are your thoughts about some of the stuff the USLPA put out today, along with where you think things might be headed over the next few weeks? Because we're only, I mean, fewer than maybe about 6 weeks away from the start of the season.
Yeah, I actually hadn't seen the posts they put out today until just now. I'm just looking up on Blue Sky. Yeah, I mean, it sounds a little scathing, like they feel like they're being left out a little bit. I see. Yeah, I see a couple, well, not even somewhat, some very snarky posts. Yes. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like they don't feel like it's going great then, I guess.
Well, I mean, as someone who's been involved with union stuff and, not directly involved immediately at the table in union negotiations, but been close enough to people having the conversations around these things, this, to me, what they put out just seems like a tactic. It's not that they're not necessarily getting closer to maybe having a deal done, but it's certainly like, we think we have leverage. Let's continue to put the pressure on the league. And I'm not saying this is necessarily good or bad, but I will be the first one to admit, because of my background, I will 100% always have at least an initial bias towards labor, always, because of everything I have seen in terms of management and how management behaves. And I think both of them are doing some of these tactics. I think it was smart on USL as a league to put this stuff out to give some focus and generate some excitement. I think that might be their way a little bit of pushing back, but I really think it more helps clarify the negotiation process. And I think labor is absolutely right to say, great, now pay us. If you're going to be professional and say all these things, then treat us like professionals. I do think something gets worked out ultimately before the season starts. And I think they just, I think part of the thing was probably USL on the league side still had some shit to get together in terms of really understanding where they're going to be in a few years. And I think part of this contract negotiation has forced some of that to happen, which is a good thing as well. And now maybe that some of that stuff is laid out a little better, they can really get into the nitty gritty of the contract talks and discussions moving forward.
Yeah, hopefully. I don't think either side can really afford a work stoppage at this point. Things are ramping up in a way where that would be pretty catastrophic for everyone involved.
It would be. And I think more catastrophic for the league and the league's image right now.
The players can always find leagues somewhere that will give them a chance, probably. This is big for USL, big inflection point.
And it is a big inflection point. And frankly, if there is I will call it good in the sense that both parties are happy with what comes out of it, but especially if the players get a strong contract in favor of, treating them like professionals, it can only help the league in the long run. They have to know this. They may have owners who are a little bit iffy, but once you start instituting promotion relegation, those owners, those teams might suffer, but those owners certainly are going to get weeded out and other people will come in. But you got to have those high standards, because when you have the high standards for the players, you're going to have better product on the field as well. When you have better product on the field, it's more marketable, which brings in your better TV contracts. And then you got the whole issue of revenue sharing, which is another beast with this whole negotiations between league owners and players. But I think in the long run, it's all good. I just hope they don't screw it up, right? Because
Yeah,
there's a
right.
lot of momentum coming here, and I think people are very excited. And now we can see in 2 years we could see this. We could see a first division, and we could start seeing some promotion relegation, and start having a single table of meaningful games, like what so many people have been hoping for so long. Um, yeah, it looks like it's on the horizon. I hope it is. I really hope it is.
It feels like we're closer than we've really ever been before.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's it's so tempting to get excited, but at the same time, there's hurdles and logistical issues that have to be taken care of. But maybe I'm saying I think they will because I hope they will, but I do think they will before. I don't expect to see a work stoppage strike thing happen before the season starts. We may go right up to the start of the season. I don't know, but
I would hope not. I think even that could be really problematic.
yeah, I think. Well, we'll see, right? How that wraps up. All right, well, let's get to our kind of our main topic of this week in San Diego soccer history. We have, as we said in the beginning, three things that we're going to dive into. First one being on this date, January 27th in 2013, the San Diego Soccer's 48 game match winning streak came to an end. So we usually try to celebrate things, but when you have a streak, like you kind of have to identify when it ends and then
Right.
reflect back on the actual streak. So it ended at a match with the Dallas Sidekicks at Dallas, and I think if I remember correctly, it was a 6-5 overtime win for Dallas. So it was close, but Dallas won, and it ended the 48 game winning streak by the Sockers in at that time, the PASL is where they were playing. So, and that actual streak, to give you an idea of how long this was, it ended January 27th, 2013. It started on December 29th, 2010. And we'll do what could be a little trivia question for some people here in just a second. But go ahead. Dylan, any thoughts on this streak here?
No, I mean, like 48 games sounds like a lot, but when you lay it out in the calendar like that, it sounds like even more.
Yeah, so it started in the 2009-2010 season and then extended all the way into the 2012-2013 season. I believe every year during the streak also, well, they won 4 PASL titles during this time. This is back when soccer's kind of had 2009 is with the second iteration of the Soccers happened. After a little hiatus, and they were playing games over at the Del Mar Fairgrounds instead of at the sports arena. But this was a time where they won 4 straight championships as well. So they still won championships. They were doing very well. I believe in this particular season, so they went undefeated the season before, that whole season, and won the championship. But then in this season, I believe that was their only loss. I think they might have had a couple other overtime victories, but that was their only loss that they had for the entire season. So pretty impressive to go from the very, very end of 2010 and then all the way through to the beginning of 2013 without or with winning all your matches. Now, I think as great as this is, which is great, when we think about in terms of the sport of soccer, this really can only happen if you don't allow draws, right? We are a sport that usually allows draws, and you have to play in a league that forces a victor on the matches. So there were, even though they won most of these games outright, there were some games, I don't remember how many total, but I think there were at least 4 within the stretch that had gone to overtime that they had won to keep this winning streak alive. And then, of course, they lost that one in overtime as well. So If you don't allow ties, that's difficult. So nowadays in most leagues in the US, they allow draws. I don't know where MASL is right now, what their overtime thing is, or if they even allow a tie after overtime. So everything changes, and every time I get back in to watch a game, I'm like, okay, what are the rules now? Right. But even like, I don't remember what it was. I want to say 15 games. The LA Galaxy had something like a 15 game winning streak, I think, to open the season in, I want to say 98, somewhere around there. But that was also because that was a time where Major League Soccer didn't allow draws. They didn't allow draws, I think, till 2000, after Don Garber became commissioner. And in the beginning, they they settled all the matches with some kind of shootout, you know. But that ended, I think, in the 2000 season.
I did not know that, to be honest with you. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the whole winning streak thing definitely is more impressive, in my opinion, in a game where you can draw. Because if you must get to a winner, then like, you didn't win all those in regulation. So I agree that I think that's
Yeah.
a real caveat.
Yeah, very, very hard. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole to see, like, what have been some of the longest streets. I think 24, maybe. Orlando in the NWSL had like an 8 game winning streak, which I think in modern top tier professional soccer, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And I was just looking up US stuff. I wasn't going out to other leagues or other places, but I did stumble across some guy, I can't remember where, squash player, so individual sport, and he had racked up something like 500 and something consecutive victories. He was like the number one squash player in the world, like, forever. I don't know how many years. And I don't know if squash is a sport also where, like, you must have a winner. So I'm not a squash player. I don't know how it's scored exactly. I played some racquetball and I played some tennis. I don't know if it's, along the same lines of either of those, but yeah, that was impressive. But it's, yeah, you go down the internet and you can find some pretty crazy, crazy streaks of things, of, a variety of different professional sports. All right, let's so kind of move on from that. But also, before I forget, the soccer is very recently, in the last few years, maybe it was 23 that it ended, but they had a big winning streak as well, and I can't remember how many games it was now off the
Well,
top of
didn't
my
they go a
head.
full season without like losing a game, or maybe without losing a game in regulation? It was. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, it's something very recently they had that as well. And again, as we start switching over to our This Week in San Diego soccer history, I'm sure that's one of those things we will go back and dive into, to look at some of these different streaks and different things that have, significant events that have happened in San Diego soccer over the years. But let's switch gears a little bit to our other two things we are going to talk about briefly. That is the 1976 San Diego Jaws, which were the precursor to the Soccers. So we're going to start with that one, then we'll move into the San Diego Spirits. And what we want to do with these right now is just kind of catch us up to maybe this general time period, end of January in 1976 for the San Diego Jaws, to kind of see what was going on, what was happening. And as we move forward with this podcast and the This Day in, or This Week in San Diego Soccer History podcast, we will kind of relive this season a little bit, kind of talk about those moments in time. And one of the ones I'm super excited about when we get into March, whether it's on this podcast or a new one, is when the Jaws have an exhibition match against the Cosmos and Pele in Balboa Stadium. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that one when we get to that time of the year. But let's look at the San Diego Jaws and kind of give a background to how we get to January 1976. So in the NASL, Now, just very brief history with the NASL. The NASL started kind of with a bang at the late 60s, lots of teams, and then quickly contracted. They had one year, maybe it was 1970, that had 5 teams, I think, but then they struggled. They were like 8 teams and 9 teams. They weren't really doing much. But then right around 1974, 75, 76, the NASL had a little bit of an explosion and big growth. So in 1974, during the 7th season of the NASL, there were 8 expansion teams that came in. It brought the league up from 9 to 15. Now, if that math is not mathing for you, since that's only 6 higher, that's because 2 of those 9 teams folded in the off season. So they had 7 continuing teams plus the 8 new teams that got them to 15. And one of those teams was the Baltimore Comets. So the Baltimore Comets played in the NASL in 74 and 75 in the outdoor league, and then they did the little mini indoor season that they had in 1975. They had some troubles, the Baltimore Comets, as an organization. They actually got evicted from their primary stadium that they had. I believe it was during the 75 season, and had to play in an alternate venue because they were not paying their rent. So they got kicked out. So, again, a whole bunch of things we could go into in terms of soccer and how soccer is run as a business in this country historically. But they finished that season in 1975 in last place, right? The owner sells the franchise. He sold it to a man named Ken Keegan, who, the best I can find out, was a car salesman up in San Jose and was also part owner of the San Jose Earthquakes, also that came in to the NASL the same year that the Boston Comets did. So he buys it. He decides to relocate the team in October of 1975. He says he's relocating the team to San Diego. And then in January, this time of year, in 1976, the San Diego team, instead of being the Comets, they get renamed to be the San Diego Jaws, because in 1975, summer of 1975, we had the big blockbuster movie Jaws. So trying to capitalize on that, they named the team the San Diego Jaws. And this is where we are right now with the team preparing for their first season in San Diego. So we just got ourselves a little caught up, and each time we come back to this, we'll dive in a little further with what is happening with the San Diego Jaws. We'll start looking into some of the individual players from the teams, along with the coaches and everything else, what was going on in soccer in the US at that time in 1976, and specifically as it relates to San Diego. So Dylan, now that we've kind of caught us up, if we went back 50 years in time to January of 1976, what thoughts do you have about the state of soccer in general, or in San Diego, or with this new soccer team, the Jaws, that is first top tier team to come back and play in San Diego since the Toros folded at the end of the 68 season?
I did not know they were named for the movie. That's pretty funny. I thought they were
Yeah.
just going for the coastal intimidating creature vibe. I don't know. I can't decide if that makes it better or worse. Yeah, I know kind of the vague history of the NASL, excuse me. But I really, the Jaws are kind of not a thing I'm super aware of, just because, again, it was just that one year. So this is all pretty much new to me as well.
Well, I remember one of my very first vivid memories of attending a soccer match is a San Diego Jaws match that I believe was, but I can't remember what the match was exactly because I was probably 8 years old at the time. And I believe they played at Aztec Bowl when I saw them. So I'd have to, maybe as we go through this, maybe I'll look through the schedule and see if I can remember what might have been the match I went to. But one of the things I remember most is I took a friend who went with us who lived on our street, and at some point beginning of the match, halftime, I don't know, but players got out there and kicked branded soccer balls into the crowd, and it said San Diego Jaws, had the logo and everything on the ball. And black and yellow, if I remember correctly, was the ball. And one came in our general direction, and the friend we brought to the game got it. And I remember being so disappointed that I did not get a soccer ball, a San Diego Jaws soccer ball, because man, the kid on the street, he loved it. We played with it all the time. He loved that thing. And I was always envious that I I didn't get, and we weren't sitting right next to each other either, because I think there was another parent or something that went. So it went like close to where I was, but over to where he was, and he got it and caught the ball. And I was a jealous little 8-year-old who wanted a San Diego Jaws soccer ball and then didn't get one. But that was my first soccer experience. And I think that might have been the first time I had played, or maybe 76. Yeah, I guess the year of 76 was the first time I actually was in a league and played soccer. And I loved it. And the San Diego Jaws have a soft spot in my heart, even though they weren't here very long, partly because that was my introduction to a live soccer match locally, before the Sockers came.
Yeah, fair enough. Even if it was just that one year, it's those first impressions matter, especially when you're that young and the world is so new to you still.
Yeah, and I'm going to be very interested myself as we go through this and kind of look at what's going on in the season and start digging into the players and who were part of this team and how they connected with San Diego, or maybe didn't, or what had happened while they were here. So that's going to be fun as we look through that over the course of this year as events come up. So let's take a quick look and pivot to the 2001 San Diego Spirit. So it was our first division women's team that we had in San Diego. We had women's teams here that played at, I don't know, we hadn't really defined the tiers of professional soccer, especially on the women's side. So there were what we would consider now probably lower league teams on the women's side that played, but they had national team players that played on them, like the San Diego Sea Lions in San Diego. But there really wasn't a coherent, big national league with backing, with things like Cox Communications and ESPN, until 2001, when the WUSA was started. So we'll go back a little bit and kind of bring us up to speed on the Spirit. So in February 2000, the WUSA was founded. Of course, this is right on the heels of the 1999 Women's World Cup, right? Trying to take advantage of that and get to create a league for women in this country. So February 2000, WUSA is founded. It is a single entity league following the structure of Major League Soccer. And I found something somewhere that I want to dig into a little more, but I believe they started with an $800,000 salary cap in total for a roster of 20 players. But I'm going to try to dig into that a little bit more. But in April now of 2000, so a couple months later, the Spirit were announced as one of the founding franchises. So there were 8 teams around the country for this first season in the WUSA. So that was in April. Then in May, on the 24th of May in 2000, they had what was called the Women's National Team Player Allocation. So they started divvying up U.S. national team pool players around to these 8 teams. So basically 8 teams, each team got 3 U.S. women's national team players. And San Diego Spirit picked up then in that allocation Julie Foudy, who was born in San Diego, even though she didn't grow up here. So a little bit of a connection, but she's a Southern California person. Joy Fawcett, who I believe is from the Inglewood area, so also Southern California. And of course, Shannon McMillan, who we all know, local product, born and raised here, San Pasqual High School graduate. Shannon McMillan. So those were our 3 U.S. national team players that we were allocated. As the year went on and we we're getting towards the end of 2000, they started having some drafts. In October, very late October, October 30th in 2000, they had what was called the foreign player allocation. And the Spirit picked up 2 Swedes in that. And it was Kristen Bengtsson and Ulrika Karlsson. And, as I was going through this also, I remember went to a lot of Spirit games, especially that first year when I was here in San Diego. And they had their matches at USD at Torero Stadium. And I was trying to remember how many of these names I remembered outside of the U.S. women's national team players, and there were very few that I actually remembered. So it was kind of interesting going through this and looking at the names and the allocation and how it happened, because I don't really I remember WUSA starting, announcing. I remember them announcing San Diego getting a team. I remember everything getting ready to start, but I don't think I just paid attention to the buildup, maybe hearing some of the names that were going to be part of it until they were ready to actually start games. Then I was excited to be able to get out there and actually watch. So they picked up a couple of foreign players. And then in early-ish December, the 10th and 11th of December, the WUSA held their draft, right? So big draft, 15 rounds, so they can pick up players to round out their team. So each team is going to have a 20-player roster. They already have 5 right now that have been allocated to them. 2 internationals, again, Spirit have 2 Swedes, and then 3 U.S. women's national team players. And then they do this draft, which is going to pick up the other 15 players. But then they're going to have another supplemental draft in early February. And we're going to save right now, just in the interest of time and everything else, and just so we could really talk about the draft and which teams kind of, or which players stay or don't stay. We're going to save all the draft results for another episode, and kind of talk through who they picked up, because there are some key players names that people have probably heard of before that they pick up in, that get picked up in this draft. But again, 15-round draft kind of rounds out the rest of your team. Then they added the supplemental draft afterwards. It was interesting, though, in this draft, San Diego actually there were a couple teams that got some extra picks here and there, but San Diego got an extra 4th-round pick because one of their U.S. women's national team players, Joy Fawcett, was pregnant as they were getting ready to get into the start of the season. And it was kind of like, well, you don't have one of your players available yet, so we'll give you an extra draft pick. So we'll go through those and talk about who got selected, and then start talking about the preparations that lead up to the beginning of the season, as we go through some of our next several episodes. So, Dylan, I'll toss it to you. Any thoughts about the startup or something for the WUSA, our country's first big attempt at a professional women's league in this country?
Not too much. I truthfully, it launched and folded before I was even really kind of aware of soccer as a sport. So it did not make much of an impression on me in my own life. It is cool that they played at Torero Stadium, and based on the attendance logs, it looks like they actually drew pretty well. So I think
they drew very well. It was fun. Some fun games.
Better than Loyal even on average, not by a whole lot, but still. So, if the league hadn't folded, you're kind of left wondering where this club may have gone. But yeah, I did also notice, and it looks like this was the roster from their last season. Allie Wagner is another national team player who jumps out at me. That's a name I know.
Yeah, we'll
get there.
Yeah,
I don't mean to give away a future topic. I just another player that jumped out at me.
Yeah, she doesn't come in till the 3rd season, I believe. She's picked up in the draft there. But
okay, sorry, I don't mean to spoil that one there.
No, that's fine. But I also, if my memory serves, and it's going to be interesting going through some newspaper articles and digging things up as we go through this calendar year for the season, I believe all those nicer seats, if you remember from the Loyal matches, all those nicer seats on the south end of the stadium. You had the concrete stuff all on one side, which is the old part, and then we had the 109 side, which are the aluminum bleachers. But then you actually had some nicer seats over on the press box side that they use now on the south end. I believe all those were put in specifically for that 2001 San Diego Spirit season to expand the stadium. I may be wrong on that. I may be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure that those got added in for that. And of course, the university has, gotten the USD. I mean, props to their groundkeepers and everything else for maintaining some nice facilities, but they have also leveraged what were nice facilities to begin with. And with these teams coming in, especially to play soccer, have invested in infrastructure for USD that they've been able to capitalize and use for these last couple of decades. I mean, the Loyal did it, WUSA did it. Like, I don't know who else really have been there, but
the Wave were there for the first half.
I'd have to think.
Season.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the Wave contributed to the infrastructure there. I was trying to think of teams that were based there and contributed, but definitely the Spirit for the WUSA and the Loyal, and USD has been able to take advantage of that to their benefit. But they wouldn't have been able to do that if they didn't have, a nice facility and a nice field to begin with.
I think on top of it being a well-kept field in a really lovely setting, Torero Stadium is kind of a uniquely awesome setting for like a lower level or small soccer stadium. The way the front row is like 10 meters off the ground or something like that, might be a bit exaggerating. You're like 6 to 8 meters off the ground is like genuinely, there's not a bad seat in the house. You are on top of the atmosphere, even if you're in the back row. So yeah, in addition to being a beautiful setting on a beautiful campus and a beautiful field, it is kind of a uniquely awesome little stadium.
Yeah, I agree. It is. I loved having the games there for the Loyal. There's some frustrating elements about Torero in terms of pregame and other stuff. We always joked about it being
transit
grandma's
access
house.
It's terrible too. Yeah,
transit access, yes, but the facility itself and enjoying a match there.
Yeah,
especially to have, I would say, a right size stadium for something like this it was really nice being able to play matches there.
100%.
And we certainly made it work for the Loyal as well to make it a fun experience, both pregame and during the game. All right. That will kind of wrap up our This Week in San Diego Soccer History segment. In future episodes, we will kind of follow along, like we said, with San Diego Jaws, what was going on with their season, and the San Diego Spirit, as well as diving in a little deeper to some other significant events in San Diego soccer history that either happened around the time of this week or maybe because what happened historically in San Diego dovetails nicely into a particular current event that has been happening recently. But that will be the focus of the This Week in San Diego Soccer segment. And the future This Week in San Diego Soccer History podcast. All right, as we wrap things up, as we said, we're going to try to give some shout outs to some local matches and things you could watch before we get into the high school matches. Did want to do a quick update that the schedules for the opening round of the US Open Cup have dropped. So we can see all the matchups. There are some fun, intriguing matchups that are happening in the opening round days. Unfortunately for us in San Diego, we don't have a women's Open Cup, so none of our women's teams are competing. We don't have any local entries because our one potential one on the MLS side is doing the CONCACAF Champions League. So we do have, I think, though, an intriguing match on that first round coming up at Championship Stadium, which is the Laguna United team that we both saw play, the match that earned them the berth. They are playing against Orange County up there. I think that could be a fun opening round match to maybe get some people from San Diego to go up and watch. So look for that mid-March. I'm just throwing that out there since the schedule came out today. But in terms of high school, I think last week talked about going out to watch Del Norte High School. They were undefeated on the boys' side, and they were ranked #1 team in the county. They're still holding that #1 ranking spot, but San Pasqual High School came in and didn't actually see the match, but 4-0 was the result. Sounded like a bit of a thumping there. So San Pasqual has moved up a bit in the rankings with that victory as well. So in terms of the open division for high school sports, both those teams are in those 8 teams that will go into the open division playoffs, and we'll describe some of that a little later for those of you who aren't familiar. But I believe this year is they're making a change to the opening round of the playoffs for the open division, just those very top 8 teams in the first division. And they'll do a home and away series for the first round. So they'll do a 2-legged round instead of a single elimination. So that could be interesting to go see, depending on what the matchups are. And that should be coming up here about mid-February. So we'll keep an eye out for those. But Del Norte lost, and what did I have on here? So just as another potential other matchup of some highly ranked teams, number 11 Mount Carmel High School is hosting number 4 San Marcos High School this week, I believe on Wednesday. So if you're in any of those areas, I recommend going out and checking that match out. On the girls' side, the number 1 team in the county is still Patrick Henry High School. They will be taking on Point Loma High School this week. So on the girls' side, in a number 1 versus number 10 matchup. So you might want to check that out. That will also be at Patrick Henry's site. And again, since we're getting deep into the high school season with only a 2-ish weeks left, I think, in the regular season, check out the Max Preps website or the NFHS, the National Federation for High Schools Network. You can watch some of these matches online as well if you can't actually get out to a match. But you should get out there. We have, as you will see as we move forward with this, and we've already talked about, we have some outstanding high school soccer players playing right now for their high school soccer teams. And will probably be some outstanding college players. And then eventually, might see some of them as professionals. And the last thing I want to do before I turn it over to you, Dylan, is give a quick shout out to Max Steelman up in, now I can't remember, Encinitas, Carlsbad, I think. But he was selected to the under-17 national team for their CONCACAF World Cup qualifiers that are going to be coming up here soon. So we got a local San Diego product. He's a forward, plays, I believe, right now in the LA Galaxy youth system. So we've got some good young players out there. Some of those who might be making history that other people will be talking about in a couple of decades from now. So we're going to keep an eye on all those athletes, and so we can start documenting and recording the history that they are making right now. All right, Dylan, I'll turn it over to you. Any comments about the games or getting out to see any matches?
No plans as it stands, but I'll see how my weekend unfolds. I've got don't really have any real plans at all. It's not that I have gone out of my way to avoid these games. I just haven't thought that far ahead yet.
Yeah, high school matches are all midweek. Some leagues play Tuesday, Thursday. Some leagues play Wednesday, Friday.
Gotcha.
They're usually most of the kickoffs. Well, they split them up on the weeknights, like Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday, because of officials. Like you don't have enough officials, so you can't play all your matches on the same nights all the time. I remember that back from my high school coaching days. And usually you alternate. One year you do Tuesday, Thursday. The next year you do Wednesday, Friday. But it wasn't always that case.
Okay, yeah. That does change the calculus a little bit.
And a lot of them, Well, I don't know. As I got out of coaching, which was way back in the early 2000s, so back about when the San Diego Spirit were playing, um, there were more and more teams. Instead of doing a JV match and a varsity match from the same gender playing, they were doing a lot more where the JV teams might go play one place together and the varsity teams would play. So you could get a double header, especially at some particular schools that have strong girls teams and boys teams. You could get a good double header match on a high school night um, of both teams playing. And I'm local here in Escondido, and I'm lucky that San Pasqual really right now has a pretty strong team. They've always had some good teams, and we've had some great players come out of there that we already know of: Milan Olaski, Jovan Karofsky, Shannon McMillan. Right, so we have some good soccer players who have come out of the area that I'm in, as well as like a ton from Torrey Pines High School and some of our other North County kind of coastal schools, as well as our South Bay schools. Right, Joe Corona. I mean, we've had lots of people come through there, so you get the chance to get out and see some of these good players before they make it big.
Future stars.
All right, I think that wraps everything up for us. Dylan, any comments before we head out?
Yeah, just a couple little news items that we didn't get to touch on today. I saw yesterday that Orange County agreed a deal to sell a 17-year-old left back of theirs to Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany. I don't know much about the kid. I'd never heard his name before, but he's just another in a long line of Orange County players that have made the leap over to Europe. I think that's undeniably one of the hotbeds of youth talent in the USL at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what Orange County is doing exactly, but they're doing something right in terms of a model.
It can't be something in the water, because the water's disgusting there.
They are doing an outstanding. Every year, it seems they have some prospect that's going to Europe on a decent, for the age of the player, and then looking at USL, a decent transfer fee.
Yeah.
But they're doing an outstanding job of really working with that teenage range of player. I mean, I still have, I think from the Loyal days, my feelings about Orange County being, like that's the rival. So it's hard to give them props and credit sometimes, but I would like to see a little bit more if they also, at the same time of moving some of these players on, could have some stronger teams. They have had in the past, but Orange County's kind of hit and miss. They're way up there or they're way down at the bottom. It'll be interesting to see how an Orange County, who thrives so much on their youth development and moving players along, how they approach this new pyramid in USL with promotion relegation, how that might change their calculus a little bit.
Absolutely. The youth team can be totally useful in a completely different way. And they can still sell players to help fund, things they want to do. But if you have a real good youth pipeline like them in Lou City, you have to assume are going to be set up well going forward, just because of that exactly.
I agree.
And then the other news I wanted to mention, this was significantly less consequential, but let me see if I can't go ahead and share my screen here real quick. The Canadian Premier League, let's see, there we go, has announced a new logo there. It should be up on screen, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. I think it's brilliant, simple. It's got the kind of modern minimalism going on, but you know exactly what it is when you look at it. So I really liked that. I thought that was a nice little brand update for them.
Yeah, it's good. It's one of those that are easy to produce, easy to reproduce.
100%, yes.
To get on things, which we'll have to talk about another time. But I don't know if you've seen the Atletico Dallas logo. They just revealed that. That is
that is the exact
design.
opposite. Yes, intricate is a very generous way of describing that.
And interesting, I heard
Sure.
the backstory about it from one of the owners on an interview, and it was interesting. But anyway, that's another conversation. But yeah, that's the exact opposite of what you see with the Canadian Premier League crest. But I agree with you. I like it. It's nice and clean,
I like
easy
it a
to know
lot.
what it is. Screams Canada. I think they did a good job with that.
100%.
All right, I think that wraps everything up for us. I'll just check one more time, Dylan. Any final things pop into your head?
Nope, those were the two I wanted to make sure I talked on. So,
all right, we'll leave it at that, and I want to thank everyone for joining us. If you want to leave a comment, you can do so here on our YouTube channel in the comment section or on socials. We're only on Blue Sky, so you can find us at soccershorts.bigpinedigital.com. And otherwise, you can join us live if you would like. We usually record on our YouTube channel here at 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. But just double checking my notes, make sure we got everything. So I think that wraps everything up for us. And we will see you next week with another episode of the LGS Pod. Good night, everyone.